Hello to everyone who is joining. Going to give us a minute here to let everybody trickle in. While we're waiting, feel free to mention in the chat where you are joining from. It's always great to hear where everyone is. Oh, wow, New Zealand, you are up very early. Thank you for, for coming in for that. Couple New Zealand, wow. You must be morning people. I think that's how the time zones are going. It's either very early or very late for you. Some California, wonderful. Oh, 8 a.m. Great, that's very reasonable. Perfect. This is very fun. You're from all over. I'm actually in Minnesota, but BookBub is based in Boston on the East Coast. So that's where most of the other BookBub folks are. Lunch and a snow. Great, perfect. All right, I'm still seeing those numbers go up, so we'll give it another minute here. All right, it looks like we've slowed down, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. So I'm Carlin. I lead the BookBub Partners marketing team. So my job is to help all of our partners understand how to use our marketing tools to sell their books as effectively as possible to the audience of BookBub members. And I'm very excited to be hosting our first BookBub Ads webinar today. But I do want to say before we get started, just want to acknowledge that a lot of us might be having a hard time today after the tragedy in Texas yesterday. I know that it can be difficult to focus on something like book marketing in the wake of such horrible news. So I am grateful that you're all here today, and just want to say I hope that everyone's taking care of themselves as well. But we are here to talk about BookBub Ads today. So I'm going to start with a quick refresher on the basics of our platform and the BookBub audience, and then share 8 tips that you can use to run more effective campaigns, including things like how to choose author targets and how to fix common campaign issues. The tips that I'm going to be sharing will be applicable to a lot of different types of books and different types of campaigns, but I do want to acknowledge upfront that I can't give specific step-by-step instructions that will guarantee success or be applicable to every book and every situation. So what I can do is give you all the information that you need to make this platform work for you. And my hope is that by the end of the webinar, you have more of the knowledge and the confidence that you need to run successful BookBub Ads campaigns. And I'm also going to leave some time for questions at the end. So if you have a question, you should see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you have questions you'd like us to answer at the end, please add them to the Q&A, not to the chat. I hope that you'll keep conversation going in the chat as well. And I have some colleagues here, Wade, Hannah, and Shaylee, who are going to be helping me out. So you might see their names in the chat or in the Q&A. But questions that you want us to answer at the end of the webinar, we'll see them if you put them in the Q&A. Okay, so before we dive into the tips, I want to make sure that everyone has a really solid foundation of how our ads platform works. So between BookBub and Chirp, we are sending millions of emails to ebook readers and audiobook listeners every day. And at the bottom of every email that we send out, there's a dedicated space for an ad. So advertisers are competing for these spots in our emails in a live auction, bidding to reach the readers in their target audience. And the advertiser with the highest bid for a particular reader at the moment that reader opens an email from us wins the impression in that email. So one impression equals one instance of your ad appearing where a reader can see it. And we also have an ad space or multiple ad spaces on the BookBub website, but the majority of our impressions are served in our emails since that's where most of our readers are engaging. So BookBub Ads is entirely self-serve, and unlike our curated deals, there's no submission and selection process. So any author can use this tool to promote any book at any time. It's our most flexible promotional tool with narrow targeting options that allow you to reach specific audiences based on things like author interest or retailer preference. And that flexibility and customization allows you to run campaigns to support almost any book marketing goal and to reach readers, whether you have $50 or $5,000 to spend. And unlike other advertising platforms, BookBub Ads was designed exclusively for authors and book marketers to promote books. So how does the auction work? There are 6 elements that go into every BookBub Ads campaign. The first is the ad creative, which is what your ad looks like. The click-through links, which determine where a reader will end up after clicking on your ad. The audience, which is who you want your ad to reach. The schedule, which defines when and for how long your ad is going to be live. The budget, which is the total maximum amount that you want to spend on that particular campaign. And the bid, which is the maximum rate that you want to pay to reach the readers in your audience. And the bid also determines how competitive your ad is in the auction. There's one additional element that impacts the auction, which is out of your control, which is the other ads that are running at the same time. So to summarize, very high level how this works, you compete with other ads that are targeting the same audience to win impressions among that audience. The auction runs each time a reader opens an email. The ad with the highest bid at that moment wins the impression. And all of the ads that are live continue competing in the auction until they run out of budget or they reach the end of their schedule. So your budget and your schedule determine how long your ad will be live, but whether or not your ad actually reaches readers and the amount that it will cost to reach readers in that audience is dependent on your bid and the other ads in the auction who are targeting the same readers. So let's talk a bit more about those readers before we get to the tips. One thing that really sets BookBub Ads apart from other ad platforms is that audience that you can reach. And understanding who our audience is a really key part of creating successful campaigns. So the people who signed up to BookBub are here to discover new books. That means that every time you win an impression or get a click on an ad, you know you're reaching someone who is looking for a new book to read. And our members are buying books across all major ebook retailers. So Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, Google, and Kobo. And BookBub Ads is one of the only marketing platforms where you can specifically target readers across all of those retailers. BookBub readers are also power readers. So 74% of BookBub readers are reading at least one book per week, and some are even reading a book a day. Our audience is price sensitive. So these are readers who signed up to BookBub to get deals on ebooks. That's what brings most people into the door. But only a quarter of our readers say that they are exclusively looking for deals, which means the majority of our audience buys full price books as well, especially from authors that they know they love. And BookBub readers are loyal fans of their favorite authors. What we found is that discounted books give our readers a chance to take away on someone new in a relatively low risk way. So 95% of our members have purchased a book from an author that they haven't heard of before because of a discount. And once they've found an author they like, they'll keep buying their books. So 63% of our readers have bought other books by an author that they discovered through a price promotion. And what this means for your ad campaigns is that the price of the book that you're promoting will probably impact engagement with your ads. So fans who have already heard of you, have read your books before, are going to be most likely to purchase higher priced books, whereas readers who are new to you are probably more likely to take a chance on a lower priced book. And this is not to say that new to you readers won't buy at full price. They do. We see advertisers running successful full price new release campaigns, but it is really important to keep these habits in mind when you're setting up your campaigns. Okay, this brings us to tip number 1, which is to set clear goals for every campaign that you run. This might seem obvious, but we do see a lot of advertisers skip this step. And no matter what type of book you're promoting, it's really critical to have goals in mind before you get started. You can accomplish a lot of different types of marketing goals with BookBub Ads, but the way that you design your ads should be different depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And it's also important to be aware that some goals are just going to be harder to hit with this type of promotion than others. And you also might not be able to achieve multiple goals with a single campaign. So some examples of goals you might have for a single ad could include increasing sales, either of the book you're promoting, maybe across an entire series. You might want to generate a profit with a positive return on your ad spend or an ROI. Maybe you just want to reach as many readers as possible, or learning can be a goal. So there might be times where you're not focused on generating book sales, but you're rather interested in learning something about your audience or about your ad campaigns. And whichever one of these goals is your top priority should inform your decisions about every element in your campaign. So for an example, let's imagine that you want to promote a free first in series book, which is a really common type of campaign that we see. So for this type of book, you probably want to achieve all three of these goals. But when it comes to setting up a campaign, you'll see that some conflicts start to emerge between these goals. So this is a really basic example framework for how we might recommend approaching a campaign for a free first in series book. So for the ad creative, you probably want to mention that the book is free somewhere in the image, likely direct readers to go to your retailer page when they click. For the audience targeting, you might choose to target a very narrow, relevant audience to maximize conversions, or you could go for the tactic of targeting a really large audience to maximize exposure. Those are both good options here. Schedule and budget in this case could be anything, but similarly to audience, there are multiple bidding strategies that might be effective for this type of book. And I'm not going to get into these particular strategies here since I'll be spending a lot more time on bidding later on. But what this is meant to demonstrate is that for this type of book, when it comes to choosing an audience to target and a bid for a campaign, you would make very different choices for a campaign that was prioritizing ROI versus a campaign that wanted to prioritize reaching as many readers as possible. So know which trade-offs you're willing to make before you start setting up your ads. And your goals should also define how you're measuring success. So some of the stats that you might rely on could include the number of impressions, which is important if you're focused on achieving wide exposure, number of clicks on your ad, which show how many readers were interested in learning more about your book. The click-through rate, or CTR, shows what % of impressions earned clicks. And if you're focused on earning back your ad spend, you'd probably want to look at the effective cost per click, or the amount you actually paid for each click on your ad based on your bid. And then there's one thing that you can't find in your ads dashboard, which is your sales numbers. So of course, you should check your retailer reporting to look for any increases in your sales if that's ultimately the goal of your campaigns. So one note in terms of goals about click-through rate. Many of you might be aware that last fall, Apple introduced new privacy settings for iOS users, prompting them to opt into an email privacy protection program that hides certain information from email senders. As a result of this new program, any email delivered to a protected Apple Mail user is going to appear as opened to senders like BookBub, whether or not that user actually opened the email. So this doesn't actually change anything about how Apple Mail users are actually engaging with their emails, but because every email to a protected user appears as opened, email senders everywhere have artificially inflated open rates as a result of this. And that also means that click-through rates are artificially lower. So the current click-through rates across all of the emails that we're sending to our members are down about 35% since September. And that's in line with what a lot of other email senders are seeing across the industry. But we are seeing that clicks, the total clicks, have remained steady since then. So what this all means for advertisers is if you had a click-through rate threshold that you were typically aiming for with your campaigns, your goal was I want to hit 3% on every ad. You might need to adjust those expectations moving forward. Again, 35% difference means 3% is going to look more like 2% for those campaigns. So click-through rate is still going to be really useful for comparing between two live campaigns and comparing campaigns moving forward from here. But a word of caution, you should not be comparing click-through rates on ads today to ads that ran prior to last September before these changes rolled out. But stats like total clicks and effective cost per click should still be reliable to compare between campaigns now and before these changes. So this is one recent change that's just important to keep in mind if you're setting click-through rate goals for your campaigns. Okay, tip number 2 is take the time to test. So it's really important to acknowledge that there is a learning curve for this type of promotion. Because you can customize every single element of your campaign, there's going to be a lot of trial and error to figure out what works for your particular books and for this particular platform. But each ad that doesn't deliver the results that you're looking for is still a really valuable learning opportunity. So don't be discouraged if it takes some time before you hit the click-through rates or the costs or the impressions that you're excited about. Advertising is an investment, and it can take time to be successful. And running tests and comparing the results between 2 campaigns is really the only way to find out what actually appeals to the readers in your target audience or which target audience is the most engaged. So this is how we would recommend setting up test campaigns. And test campaigns are actually just regular ad campaigns, the goal of which is to compare the impact of changes on one particular campaign element. So you want to create 2 or more ads to run at one time. You can test as many variations at once as you like, but the campaigns should be identical except for that one element that you're testing. It's important to only test one element at a time so you can actually isolate the results of the test and identify which changes have an impact on your campaign results. We recommend using low budgets for your test campaigns. $10 can be enough to get sufficient data here to draw conclusions. And you can always add more budget later on if you want to spend more in a particular campaign, but you don't want to burn through your whole budget on the test campaigns. We recommend a high CPM bid for test campaigns. So that's cost per 1,000 impressions. Again, I'll get more into bidding in a little bit. But this will basically ensure that you win an equal number of impressions for each test campaign and get data really quickly. You want to use the same bid amount for each test campaign because in that case, the auction will serve those ads randomly. And you want to run these ads until you hit around 1,000 impressions each. Give or take, that is a threshold at which we've seen results can be reliable moving forward. And then you compare the results. So again, you can still use click-through rate to compare between 2 current campaigns, but you could also look at cost to see which of them is the variation that you're happier with. And from there, continue to test or optimize if you are not quite happy with the results. Or if you are satisfied, then you can add budget to that campaign and keep it running. And the testing process is usually not going to be a one-time process. So be patient and keep trying different variations until you do get to results that you're happy with. So what are some things that you can test? Ad images are a really common thing to test because there are infinite variations of different images that you could try here. So with this series of ads, the advertiser tried out a variety of completely different image designs. And this one that highlighted the deal price actually got the highest click-through rate out of this batch. You can also isolate one part of the image to test. So this advertiser kept the copy and the call to action the same, but swapped out the background images. And in this case, this was the image with the highest CTR. You can also test ad copy to see what drives the most clicks. So these images were actually designed with our Inform Creative Builder, which is a very easy way to quickly set up campaigns to test your ad copy in particular. And for this batch, the image on the right with slightly more information about the plot had higher engagement. Other than images, you can also test your author targets. So many advertisers spend a lot of time trying different targets to find audiences that are highly likely to click on their ads and convert. So these 3 campaigns each used a different single author target, but the same image, same bid, same budget. And you can see that one of the author targets generated much more engagement than the other 2. And this brings us to tip number 3, which is actually choosing your author targets. So one of the most important parts of creating successful ad campaigns is targeting the right readers. There are a number of different ways you can define which audience of BookBub readers you want your ads to reach. should say BookBub or Chirp readers, because you can tailor by format preference. So reach readers who read audiobooks or ebooks. You could narrow your audience by region. So we have members in the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and India. You can target readers who use a particular ebook retailer, readers who are signed up to certain categories, or readers who are fans of particular authors. And these preferences are all collected directly from our subscribers, even the region preferences. So the Apple Mail privacy changes didn't impact our ability to actually target our members at all. And the two of these factors that I'm going to focus on today are actually category and author targeting, because that is where I see most advertisers go wrong. So targeting by category interest means that your ad could reach any reader subscribed to that category on BookBub. And targeting by author interest includes any readers who follow that author on BookBub or who have engaged with them on our platform in the past, such as by clicking on one of their featured deals. You can also combine author and category targeting to ensure that you're only reaching the most relevant readers within an author's fan base. So in the example shown here, this ad would only reach the readers who are fans of one of these authors and also subscribed to the fantasy category on BookBub. This is a particularly useful strategy if you're targeting authors who write in multiple genres with the same pen name. So it can be really tempting to target by category because it's simpler. They're huge audiences, but we've seen that author targeting is almost always going to be a more effective choice for generating high click-through rates and conversions on your ad campaigns. So ads that include author targeting, either on its own or combined with categories, have 61% higher click-through rates than ads that are using category targeting alone. But then, of course, the question is which authors to target. So first, don't forget to target your own fans. This is a great strategy for new releases, of course, or after you've run a featured deal to retarget any readers who clicked on that deal. And in this case, you want to make sure that your author name or the series title, something that those readers will recognize, is featured really prominently in the ad. So those readers will immediately know they're seeing an ad for a book by an author they are interested in. If you want to reach new readers, you can target fans of similar authors. Some general tips you should keep in mind when selecting targets. First is avoid the biggest names in your genre. So some authors are so big and so popular that their audience can be really competitive to reach with this kind of platform, which results in really high costs to reach those readers. And we've also seen that they can have less engaged audiences for ads. So you can see here that the average click-through rate is highest for authors who have 25,000 or fewer readers in their audience. And that drops off again if they have over 500,000 readers. And we display the size of each author's audience in the author targeting section of the ad form. So keep these thresholds in mind when you're adding targets to your campaigns. And don't just target the first names in your genre that you think of. Take the time to identify the authors who write books that are really similar to your own. One way you can do that is by looking for books with similar tropes or themes, as well as books that have similar cover branding. Especially if you're using your book cover in your ad image, you want to reach readers who immediately identify your book as similar to other books that they have read and loved. You should also check for compatible distribution. So if your books are in Kindle Unlimited, you might have more success targeting other authors with books in KU. And if your books are wide, you should look for other wide authors since they're more likely to have readers across all of your retailers. Some advertisers even say they prefer to target indie authors with their indie published titles and other trad authors with their traditionally published titles. You should also always retest any targets that work well for you on other ad platforms to confirm that they'll also work on BookBub Ads. So because our author audiences include readers who have engaged with an author's books on BookBub, the authors with really large followings on BookBub might be different from the authors who have really large followings on other platforms. So if you have targets that work well for you elsewhere, just make sure to start with a low budget test to confirm that you'll get similar results on BookBub before putting more budget into that ad. Okay, some ways that you can identify potential targets. First great place to start is looking at your also bots on retailers. You can browse popular authors in your genre on retailers, but again, avoiding the biggest names and looking for really similar themes and branding. You can also ask your readers, survey them and see which other authors they think write books that remind them of your books. This can be a great way to get some inspiration that you might not have thought of yourself. You can also keep an eye out for books that we're featuring on BookBub or Chirp that are similar to yours. This is a great strategy because you know those authors will have large engaged followings on BookBub for you to target. And we also have a tool right in the ad form to help you discover new targets to try out. That's our related authors tool. So after you've added at least one author target to a campaign, we'll generate a list of other authors who share fans with the author or authors you've already selected. And in this case, you should still do your due diligence to research these targets that we recommend, but we hope that this will help you find some new authors and new audiences to test out. So one of the most common questions that we get about author targeting is how many authors to include in a single ad campaign. So some advertisers prefer to use just one author target per campaign. This gives you the greatest amount of control over how much you spend for each of those targets. But the flip side is that it can be really time consuming to create a lot of different versions of the same campaign, especially if you're trying out a lot of different authors. Other advertisers like to include multiple author targets. This is great because it's faster to set up a single campaign with many targets, but you might end up with an uneven distribution of impressions among your various targets. But we do actually let you quickly view the stats for each author target when you add multiple authors to a single campaign. You can find that in your dashboard under the ad details and then click on the aggregate stats tab. And you'll see a breakdown of costs, click-through rates, and impressions by author. So you can see any difference in performance between the multiple targets you've added to one campaign. Okay, tip number 4, include a strong hook in your ad image. So the ad creative is a hugely important part of your campaign because it's actually all that a reader sees in their email. They don't have any context of knowing why you targeted them, how your ad is targeted. They just see the image in front of them at the bottom of their email. So that image needs to do all of the work to encourage the right kind of readers to click and learn more about your book. There are a few things that we know make for really effective hooks for our particular audience of readers. First one, unsurprisingly, is a deal price. And the lower the deal price, the more clicks you can expect on your ad. So we did an analysis of over 1,000 BookBub Ads images, and on average, ads that contained the word free had a 32% higher click-through rate than the overall average of the sample. And 99 cents is also a really compelling price. So in that same analysis, ads that displayed a price of 99 cents or 99 pence had a 31% higher average click-through rate than ads displaying a price of $1.99 or higher. We also have evidence that including any pricing information in your ad image can improve conversion rates, which is the percentage of readers who purchased a book after clicking on an ad. So we only have conversion rate data for ads for Chirp books because we own that sales data because we're actually selling the books on Chirp. So this data is specific to that platform. But what we saw is that the conversion rate of ads for Chirp audiobooks displaying prices under $2 was 2 times higher than ads that displayed prices above $2. And Chirp audiobook ads that mentioned a sale or a discount, but didn't have any specific price in the image, converted at an average rate 3 times higher than ads without any mention of the price. So if you have a book that's priced above $2.99, say you've got like a $3.99 discount, try putting discount in there rather than any pricing information, and odds are good that you'll see more clicks and higher conversions than including no pricing information at all. Again, specific to Chirp audiobooks, but we would expect that this trend is similar for ebooks too. Another great hook is to highlight a popular trope in your genre. This is something that we've tested really extensively in the blurbs for our featured deals. We found that adding tropes can have a significant positive impact on clicks. So in this example, we've got both a brother's best friend and a fake courtship. So that's 2 great tropes to mention here. We've also found that quotes can make for really good hooks. So if you have a really strong quote from an author, a publication, or a review, put that into your ad image. Similarly, this is something that we've tested a lot in our featured deal blurbs, and we've found that between those blurb tests and surveys of our members, they put a lot of trust in the authors they like to recommend books. So if you have a great author quote, that's a really fantastic thing to include in an ad image. And finally, you can entice readers to click by including a comparison to a comparable book, author, movie, TV show, with the caveat that it should be an accurate comparison. You really don't want to set misleading expectations in your ad copy, which could end up disappointing your readers. One last general image tip is to make sure that it's really obvious from one glance what kind of book you're promoting. Again, you want your ad image to be immediately appealing to your ideal audience, even if they don't know why they're being targeted with your ad. And your book cover can do a lot of this work for you, which is why it's so important to have a cover that's really well optimized for your genre, but explicitly mentioning the genre somewhere in your ad can't hurt either. So we've got this one says feel good romance perfection, and the other says a sci-fi fantasy masterpiece. So readers know exactly what kind of genre they can expect. So here's some more examples of ads that all had high click-through rates. You can see that there's a lot of room for creativity and variation here. We have a lot more examples on our blog too, if you're looking for more inspiration. Okay, tip number 5, choose the right bidding strategy. So your bid is the key to actually getting your ad in front of readers, since your bid determines how competitive it is in the auction. Your bid also determines the rate that it costs to run your ad. So choosing the right bidding strategy and bid amount can help you achieve both scale and ROI for your campaigns. When you're setting a bid, a higher bid is more competitive, which means your ad is more likely to win impressions, but it also means that your ad might be more expensive. So those are the two different forces to keep in mind when you're deciding what to bid on a campaign: the cost versus the reach that higher bid might enable for you. One thing to keep in mind is that your bid is the maximum rate that you would pay for impressions or clicks, but you often will end up paying less than what you bid. And that's because when you have the winning bid, what you actually pay for that impression or click is the rate of the next highest bidder in the auction. You'll be able to see that rate that you're paying right in your ad stash. That's that effective cost per click stat. We also show the effective CPM if you're using CPM bidding. So you can see the discrepancy between the amount you're bidding and the amount you're actually paying based on the next highest bid. We also display a range of average winning bids right in the ad form to give you a sense of what other advertisers are bidding. And this is, again, just a guideline to give you some context. It's important to keep in mind that the exact same bid can actually be significantly more or less effective at winning impressions, depending on how competitive the audience that you're targeting is. So you get a sense of the platform average, but know that your own bid might need to be different than what you see there for your particular audience. But this is another reason to avoid targeting only the most obvious authors in your genre. So you might have to bid higher to win impressions among those readers. So you can choose to bid CPM, which is cost per 1,000 impressions, or CPC, which is cost per click. Bidding CPM means that you're paying for the readers who see your ad, get those impressions, whereas bidding CPC means that you only pay for the readers who actually clicked after seeing an impression. And there are trade-offs and benefits to each of these two strategies. So when you want to guarantee that your ad is going to serve impressions, CPM bidding is usually the best option. So this includes when you're running test campaigns. It's also a really good option for short-term campaigns where you want to reach a lot of readers in a limited time. And in general, it's the best way to ensure that your ad gets served to a large audience of readers. But in terms of trade-offs, CPM bidding can be riskier from a cost perspective because you're paying the same amount when you serve 1,000 impressions, whether you get 0 clicks or 100 clicks from those impressions. So when you're bidding CPM, it's particularly important that you optimize your image and your targeting to maximize engagement with your ad. But if your ad does have a high click-through rate, CPM bidding can be a really cost-effective option. There is one additional risk for CPC that's related to the Apple Mail privacy protections I mentioned earlier. So because our auction is triggered by email opens in many cases, there's a risk that we serve ad impressions to emails that were artificially opened by this Apple Mail system, but weren't actually seen by a real user or reader at the other end. And obviously, that's something that we would really like to avoid. We want you to reach readers. And CPM advertisers are at the greatest risk here since they're paying per impression. So if we suspect that an email is artificially open, we'll prevent CPM campaigns from serving in that case. And this does seem to have been pretty effective so far, but we do want to acknowledge that we can't fully eliminate this risk. And if any artificial opens do slip through the cracks, there will be a corresponding drop in click-through rate, like I mentioned earlier. So do keep that in mind, but we have spoken with a lot of advertisers since these changes rolled out in September and have been reassured that they're still finding CPM to be a really effective bidding strategy. And many of them have not noticed significant changes to their campaigns. Okay, with CPC bidding, you pay for clicks, not all impressions. So unlike CPM, there's no risk of paying for impressions that don't get any engagement. So CPC can make a lot of sense if you're not worried about serving lots of impressions in a short window. And a long-running CPC campaign can be a really effective way of driving consistent clicks or sales over a long time period. We call these drip campaigns because you get a steady drip of clicks over time. CPC can also be a great choice for controlling your costs. Again, you're only paying for the users who actually engaged with your ad, which means that it can be a really good option for ROI-focused campaigns. But the trade-off with CPC, since you're usually focused on getting a low cost per click, is that you might find it's harder to win a high volume of impressions with this bidding strategy. So remember, again, that you always pay less than your total bid amount. So don't be afraid to set a slightly higher CPC bid than your actual target cost per click. So CPC campaigns are not at risk of paying for any artificial Apple Mail impressions, but there is one other thing that CPC bidders should be aware of. And that's that our auction prioritizes the CPC campaigns that are getting engagement. So if your ad is not getting any clicks, it becomes increasingly less competitive in the auction. So if this happens to you, don't edit the campaign because our auction will already have flagged it as one that's not getting engagement. So you should copy the campaign and then edit it to try to increase engagement to give that new campaign a fresh chance in the auction. And if you do have a campaign that runs into this issue that still has a lot of time left in its schedule, we'll actually email you to let you know that that's happened. So those are some of the trade-offs to keep in mind with these different bidding strategies, but it can also come down to just personal preference. Some advertisers feel more comfortable with CPC, others with CPM, and that's totally fine too. If you're just prefer one over the other, that's a perfectly good way to choose between them. Okay, and then whether you choose CPC or CPM, many of the same principles apply when deciding what amount to bid. So first, you can try to calculate a rate that you can afford to pay per click based on how much you can expect to earn from sales of the book that you're advertising, and including follow-on sales of any later books if it's a first in series. And actually doing this calculation is really important if you want to ensure a positive ROI for your campaigns. We've actually got a blog post that breaks down how to do this calculation. I'm not going to get into that today. Just takes a couple steps going through your expected revenue based on your royalty rates and factoring in follow-on sales. But otherwise, depends on your goals, which is back to tip number one. So in general, the higher the bid, the more likely it is that your campaign will win impressions. So when you're running a short-term campaign and need to win a lot of impressions quickly, you can try bidding on the higher end of what we recommend in that range that we display. And bidding high also maximizes your ad's exposure. So if you want to reach more readers, you can always increase your bid. On the flip side, you can bid lower for longer term campaigns since there's less time pressure to win impressions quickly. And as I mentioned, you can always lower your bid to keep your costs down. It can be harder to win impressions with a lower bid, so you might just have to be a little bit more patient for campaigns with lower bids, but this can still be a really effective strategy for some campaigns. Okay, tip number 6. This one is going to actually be a lot of tips wrapped into one larger tip, but the overall tip is to learn how to troubleshoot your campaigns. So you should always use your own particular goals to decide which of these tips to apply to a particular campaign. But knowing what you want your campaign to achieve is the first step to understanding how it's not hitting the mark. And then it's a matter of just making adjustments and tinkering with the different campaign elements. When you do apply these tips to campaigns, though, just make sure that you always test out any changes with low budgets first. So that way you can confirm that the changes are having the anticipated impact before you spend more on the campaigns. Okay, first, what if your ad is not winning impressions? This is in no particular order, but the simplest way to win more impressions is to set a higher bid. CPM bidding is straightforward. Raising your bid makes your ad more competitive. But as I mentioned, troubleshooting a low-serving CPC ad is a little more complicated because of that click-through rate factor that the auction takes into account. So for a CPC campaign, you can try pausing it, editing the new campaign to try to make it more engaging. Or if you continue to really have trouble winning impressions with a CPC ad, you can always try switching to CPM, knowing some of the various trade-offs between those bidding strategies. If you're already using a high bid and you can't win impressions, it might be that your audience is too competitive and there are too many other advertisers with higher bids trying to reach them at the same time. So again, remember to avoid targeting the most well-known authors in your genre and instead try to find some more niche authors who write content very similar to your book. If you're only targeting Amazon US readers, you might want to try some other regions or other retailers if your books are wide to try to reach, again, less competitive audiences. And lastly, if your primary goal is just to get your ad in front of as many readers as possible, you can also try switching to category targeting in this case, which definitely increases the size of your potential audience, but again, you might have lower engagement. All right, what if you are winning impressions, but then your ad is not getting enough clicks? Engagement on your ads is all about finding the sweet spot between the audience that you're reaching and the message that you're showing them in your image. So a low click-through rate means either that the audience, the image, or the combination of audience and image is not working. So first, see if you can add one of those hooks that we talked about in the image tips. You could also try dramatically different image designs to see if you can incorporate some element that's going to drive more clicks. Or try to identify author targets who have a more engaged audience. If you're truly having trouble getting traction with image designs and you've been using your book cover in your ad images, it might be worth taking a step back and evaluating whether your cover is a good fit for your genre and your target audience. In order for your ads to be successful, you have to make sure that you've locked down all of the basics and that your book is in the best position to appeal to the readers that you want to reach. All right, what if you are winning impressions, getting clicks on your ad, but you're not seeing any impact on your sales numbers? So in this case, you're getting clicks, but they might be from the wrong audience. If you're getting clicks, that means that you've found an image that works with the readers you're targeting with that ad. But something about your book when those readers get to the retailer page isn't aligning with their expectations. Might also be that the price of your book is too high. So remember that BookBub readers are more likely to purchase at lower prices, especially for authors that are new to them. So you can try either discounting the book that you're promoting or choosing another lower priced book to promote. Lastly, it might be that something else on your retailer page is turning them off. So do a candid evaluation in this case if you're not getting conversions when you're getting clicks on your ad. Ask yourself if your book cover is professional and aligned with your genre. Is your book description clear and engaging? Do you have a lot of positive reader reviews? Again, if your ads are getting clicks that are not converting to sales, you might need to spend some time improving your book page before you invest more in advertising. All right, last, troubleshooting. So let's say everything else is working. You're getting clicks, they're converting to sales, but your ad is more expensive than you would like it to be. What can you do in this case? First, adjust your bid, which controls, again, the rate that you're actually paying for those ads. Lowering your bid is always going to keep your costs down. But again, remember that it might make your ad less competitive in the auction. So you might need to tweak some other elements of your campaign, like the targeting or just extend the campaign, let it run longer in order to win enough impressions at a lower bid to still spend your entire budget. If you're using CPM bidding, you can try to increase your click-through rate. So again, if you pay the same amount for every 1,000 impressions that you win, if you get more clicks, that would lower your cost per click and might improve your ROI. Or you can try switching to CPC. So you're only paying for the readers who click and not for the impressions that readers aren't engaging with. The other thing you can try in this case is to change your targeting. So again, either try to identify some less competitive author targets or switch to less competitive regions or retailers if you can. There's one last thing that you can try to troubleshoot your campaigns, which brings us to tip number 7. Just take a break. So sometimes one of the best things that you can do for your ads is actually just to pause them. This might seem counterintuitive. So why can pausing a campaign improve your results? So first, our audience is finite. If you have been running the same ad for a while, and especially if you're targeting a relatively narrow audience, many of the readers in your target audience could have already seen your ad image. So you can always try changing your image, but sometimes pausing a campaign for a bit and then restarting it up again later on can be enough to re-engage your audience or even hit new readers who fall in that audience. Not every BookBub email, much as we might like, is opening their email every single day from us. So you might reach a new subset of the same audience if you wait a little bit. Another reason why pausing your campaigns can be beneficial is it allows you to wait out the competition. So if campaigns that have been performing well for you suddenly stop serving, you might be getting outbid by another new advertiser who just showed up. So you can try raising your bid or changing your audience, but otherwise your best bet is to wait for the auction to change again. Unless you're promoting something really time sensitive, like a new release or a limited time discount, taking a break and coming back in a couple of weeks can sometimes be the best way to refresh your ad performance. All right, tip number 8, last one. This is maybe a little cheesy, but ask for help. We have a dedicated team of reps here at BookBub, some of whom are here in the chat and Q&A, whose entire job is to answer your questions. So if there's anything that you want to know about running ads, please reach out to us. If you email partners@bookbub.com, you're always going to get a response from a real person on the other end. They're here to help you be successful. So whether that question is, can we take a look at your campaign and offer advice? Maybe we can identify that you're making a common mistake. Or if you just want to know more about how our auction works or get more tips like I shared today, please reach out to us. We also have a lot more information on our blog at insights.bookbub.com. There's a whole section for BookBub Ads where you can find a ton of fantastic examples of effective campaigns that other partners have run, as well as more information on a lot of the topics we covered today. So 2 great resources where you can get help for your campaigns. And that leaves us some time for questions. So I'm going to ask my colleague Wade to jump in and help out here. He's been keeping an eye on your questions. Wade, what do we have?
Hi, Carlin. All right, we've got a bunch of questions. First, this was a common one. Folks are just knowing if the slides will be available to download later or if they can rewatch the presentation later. So just curious what access they might have to this content after this session.
Yes, great question. And I apologize. I should have mentioned that up front. We are recording this, so we will share the recording with all of you afterwards. And I'll see if I can get the slides available as well if you just want to spend more time without having to, pause at every moment. So yes, you will have access to this afterwards.
Awesome. There also were a bunch of folks asking about CTR, click-through rate, and if there's sort of an ideal or target click-through rate they should be working towards on our platform.
Yeah, great question. So I can say that one reason we don't actually share an average click-through rate is because not every advertiser is looking at click-through rate or optimizing for that in their campaigns. So that's why that's not a number that we tend to share, is that it's not super representative actually of what people are going for. In a lot of conversations with advertisers, I hear thresholds like 1% or 2% as sort of a starting point of what they look for to keep a campaign running if they're running test campaigns. So that's sort of common numbers that I do hear a lot, but Again, if someone's really focused on their cost per click, they might not be looking at that click-through rate at all, and instead thinking about what cost they're trying to get that will have profitable campaigns for them. But yeah, 1 or 2% is kind of a common threshold that I hear.
Cool. Next up, is there a maximum number of authors we suggest targeting? Like, is there a certain threshold that we think people shouldn't go over with their author targeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really up to your stamina, honestly, to add authors. I don't think that we have an actual hard limit. I've seen some campaigns targeting dozens, maybe 1 or 2 targeting hundreds of authors. And at that point, it's really kind of a trade-off. When you're adding that many authors to a campaign, it might be harder to get data on each of them, just to make sure that you're serving impressions to sort of all of those different targets with that single campaign. So that's a tricky one to answer. It's really up to you. And it depends on the size of those particular authors' audiences as well. If you have a lot of authors with just a couple thousand fans, I would recommend batching as many of them as you can to get your total potential audience as big as possible. Just because authors with smaller audiences, you'll probably burn through them pretty quickly, which means you'll just reach all those readers pretty quickly if there's not a lot of readers in that total audience size.
Awesome. Next up, so a question about the testing with $10, basically saying, is that $10 per day or just $10? Would you recommend spending that all at once over a few days? Like, I think folks were kind of surprised by how low that was. So just curious if you have any advice for what to do with your $10 when testing.
Yeah, sure. So I've seen a lot of different things. So some advertisers like to do, I didn't actually talk about our schedule and budgets at all here, but you have 2 options. You can either set a daily budget and it's a continuous campaign. So your budget will reset every single day indefinitely until you pause your campaign, or you can set a start and end date with a total budget that will spend over the course of that time period. So for testing, you could do a continuous campaign if you're planning to check every single day and put $10 for your daily budget. That's a good way, just again, if you're willing to make sure that you don't forget to come back and check it, is one strategy. But otherwise, you could say $10 over, probably if you're bidding high enough, you can serve that in a day. But you could set 3 days just to make sure. And in that case, you don't need to worry about coming back to pause that because you know that we've set an end date and that the $10 is the total budget for the campaign rather than the daily budget. But I would say that's $10 sort of per variation that you're testing. And 10 is just a rough suggestion. Again, depending on the actual cost of the audience you're targeting, you could do $5 and get 1,000 impressions. Or if it's a really competitive audience, it might take a little bit more than 10 to hit that roughly 1,000 impression threshold. So $10 is kind of a rough guiding point to start with. But the whole point of test campaigns is kind of see what happens. But I hope that that helps give a little bit more context about your options for setting up those test campaigns.
Awesome. Thanks, Carlin. So many great questions. I'm just scrolling through to make sure I find them all. This was a good one. I think just in terms of our author and category targeting, is it like a both or either or situation? So for example, this is kind of an extreme example that this person wrote in, but if you select Stephen King and historical romance, will the ad be served to both people who are interested in Stephen King and people who are interested in historical romance, or would it have to be, or could it be just one or the other? Does that make sense, Carlin?
Yes, that's a perfect example. It would be, so that in that case, it would be readers who are signed up to get historical romance deals who also follow or have clicked on Stephen King books. So it's not and, it's or, I think. So because it's or within. So if it was Stephen King and I don't read horror, so I'm not going to be able to come up with another horror author, but Stephen King and another author and no category targeting, it would be any reader who follows either of them. So it's expanding your audience, the more authors you add. But when you add an author and a category, it narrows that audience to the overlap between those two. I hope that answered that clearly enough.
I followed, but I also work here. So. let's see, what else do we have? Is there a way to filter related authors by category or subcategory? I think that might just be helpful feedback for us in the future, but wanted to double check.
Yeah, there is not right now, but that is a really great request. So we will make a note of that.
Awesome. Here's one. If you target a group of authors in a single campaign, say you're targeting 10 different authors, but they write in different genres, will that potentially hinder the campaign or could that confuse our algorithm?
Yeah, good question. You might end up with really variable results, but I don't think it would change anything about how we serve your campaign. So again, it's additive when you add authors. So if you did historical romance, let's say it's Sarah McLean and Stephen King, you would reach anyone who is a fan of either one of them. So it'd be a much larger audience. But I don't think that that would actually change anything with how we serve the ad in the auction. It would just, I mean, it would be depending on exactly how much diversity you have among those authors might be a really interesting test to see what kind of results you get. But it wouldn't change anything about how our auction serves that ad.
Great.
I would just say make sure you go and check the stats for those different authors to see are they serving at the same rates? Do they cost really different amounts? Do they have really different click-through rates between them? You'd still get that data.
Awesome. Thanks, Carlin. Just wanted to acknowledge the folks who wrote in with questions about if we would be providing different options for the size of the ad. I think that's for now just like really helpful feedback for us. Carlin, correct me if I'm wrong, but just wanted to acknowledge a few folks would love to have some different options there.
That is great to know. Yeah, no plans at the moment, but if you have particular sizes that you would like to see, please email us at partners@bookbub.com and let us know the specifics of what your request is for that. In general, any feedback, questions, requests you have about the ads platform, please do email in and let us know. We pass that along to our engineering team to make sure that they know what would make your lives easier. So that feedback is fantastic for us to hear, to know how we can make the platform even better for you.
Great. Also just wanted to flag a few folks have written in requesting some more subcategory options in the targeting, like dystopian, fiction, legal thrillers, etc. Really appreciate that feedback as well. Next up, there was a couple of questions with folks wondering if you had any particular advice for advertising pre-orders and if that's a strategy you would recommend.
Oh, yes, great question. Pre-orders can be a tougher sell because there's no instant gratification for that reader. So I would say targeting your own fans with a pre-order is a really fantastic option. If you have a limited time deal price for your pre-order, if you're offering some sort of special pre-order price, put that in the ad image, limited time and discount is sort of two hooks. And then the pre-order window is also a really good time to run tests. So try out different author targets, try out different images. And then when release day hits, you'll have some more data from those campaigns to know what works best, what got the most clicks once the book's actually live and readers can get that instant gratification. But otherwise, many of the same tips apply.
Awesome. Carlin, do you have time for one more or?
Yeah, we can do one more.
Okay, great. Also want to acknowledge there were just a lot of really great questions. So if we didn't get to your specific question, please do write in to partners@bookbub.com and our team would be happy to answer. Great to see all of the engagement from everyone. So thank you. Just scrolling through again. So here's one. Does budget with a CPC campaign affect delivery? For example, with a campaign with $100 a day budget and a 50-cent CPC, be more likely to serve than a $10 a day budget with a 50% CPC? So basically, does the overall budget of the campaign make it like more desirable in the auction model?
Yeah, great question. It does not. The budget has nothing to do with the auction. It just sort of determines when your campaign will stop serving. So as soon as we hit your budget, it's not going to keep running. But it doesn't impact, and the bid is the only thing that determines the competitiveness in the auction. And then for CPC campaigns, that click-through rate, but the budget is not a factor that the auction takes into account. We have 1 minute. If we have one more, maybe quick
Here we
question.
go.
I'm sure you're sifting through to find a good one.
Yeah. Question, how does an author get like readers? So basically, in order for someone to be counted as like an author's reader, if they don't follow on BookBub, is it, sorry, I'm just making sure I read the question. Do you need to have clicked on an ad? Have you need to have opened an ad? Like, how do you interact with an author on BookBub to get counted as someone's reader if you don't follow them?
Yeah, that is a good question. So we use a lot of different click signals on our platform. So following is definitely one. Clicking on a featured deal is definitely one. I think we include clicks if you visit the author's profile, if you click on one of their books. So for example, you can wish list books on BookBub. So if I have an author's book wish listed as something that I want to read, I would be eligible to get ads targeted to their fans. I don't know that I have an exhaustive list of those signals memorized, so I don't want to share any that I'm not completely confident about. And that's something that we also kind of test a little bit sometimes. So it's the reason I don't have the full list memorized is there might be some signals that we have changed over time. But we look for engagement on our platform that indicates that a reader is likely to be interested or has been interested in that author at some point in the past. It's definitely bigger than just followers though, so.
Thanks, Carlin.
Yeah, and then I think we are at time here. So again, thank you all so much for joining. We will be sending out a recording, and if you had a question that we did not get to, please do email us. Let us know you were at the webinar and had a burning question, and we will help you out. Thank you all so much.